Okay, good evening, everybody, and welcome to today's workshop, which is part of the Clean Air Ghana campaign. Today, we have one of our air quality champions, Doris, Edem Agbevivi, who is going to lead a session on how we can fight air pollution through and ensure clean and safe environments through policy and advocacy. In the earlier sessions that we've had, the role of policy was highlighted, but how exactly can we engage with policy to ensure clean air for? So just to give by way of introduction, Doris is an energy analyst who is also a Yale Climate Fellow. She has years of experience in clean energy and sustainable development in Ghana and internationally. She's been involved in the World Health Organization's Urban Health Initiative. She's the organizer of the first e-mobility conference in Ghana, the first public conference in Ghana, and then the first public charging forum that ushered in an era of green, sustainable energy use in Ghana. She's also led the first EV baseline study that has been done in Ghana. So she's firmly edged in the area of solutions. We've talked a lot about how do we find solutions to the clean air, to the air pollution problem and ensure clean air. So her work around clean energy, mobility, etc., actually help to advance some of the solutions that we are interested in. So I'll just hand over to Doris to take us through today's session. And of course, after her presentation, I'm sure we'll have questions and we'll engage in further discussion. So over to you, Doris. And thank you for availing yourself to support us in this project.
Thank you, Gameli. Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and a pleasure to be connected. Hope my camera is on. Yeah. Okay. Just going to share my screen now. Is that from me? No. Okay, so as Gameli has said, my name is Doris. I have a bit of voice when it comes to clean air because, as we may all know, clean air is not, we don't have an exact policy for clean air in Ghana. You can actually get the intersection of clean air from various sectors that run together. So I would say I've been doing a lot of all the other sides of work that comes to clean air. And so I'm really excited to be here. I want to sort of sound a note of caution that in this discussion, it's a discussion. I'm just bringing my knowledge on board, the little I have to share. And I believe everybody has equal knowledge to share on this platform. So please, let's feel free to be happy to share your knowledge at any time. I'm happy to take questions whilst I'm doing the presentation, but I want to limit it to 5 questions at the moment whilst I'm doing the presentation. But just so that we can have a fruitful discussion, I'll take 5 questions during the presentation, and afterwards, once the presentation is done, we can go ahead and have as many questions as possible. The subject of clean air it looks too far for some people. It seems as though it is just a song that is always being sung or something of that sort. But it's more than that. And I feel I want to be able to say that when you take what consists of us saying we have clean air or we don't have clean air, it goes beyond just we saying, oh, I'm breathing an air, or what I'm breathing doesn't feel good, or that, or that's the usual we say. But if we look at Ghana as a whole, we can be able to tackle clean air by just going by the sectors. I and I will be able to tackle just 3 of those sectors. Don't worry, every referencing I've made here, I usually have a reference tab for everybody to go back and read the documents and read the news items, read the articles, look at the videos if you have to, just so you get more information. Because I say without information, I don't know what you want to advocate. You can try as much as possible, but you will not be able to advocate. So I would want to first just go into just saying what we've already discussed here when it comes to clean air. Okay, thank you. My slide wasn't working, so permit me, I had to take some time on that. So I just want to first go into what it means to have clean air, what we mean by air pollution, really. And all these things are coming from the WHO website. Aside the fact that I have worked with the WHO, I am a keen believer in we taking source that really we can use in the future and we can use to make our advocacy a strong selling point. So in the definition of WHO, it looks at what air quality is and it looks at what air pollution is. And what we say is the fact that when we say air is quality or air is clean, then it has met some standards that has been set by the WHO. So there are guidelines. You can look on their website for those guidelines. And those guidelines will pick a number of pollutants. And those pollutants is what you were trying to say, that every pollutant would have its level, a threshold, and you don't want to be able to go beyond those thresholds. And if you can see on the slide here, I mentioned some of these pollutants. And then I've mentioned their originations. Of course, the pollutants we're used to is the PM 2.5, PM 10 for those on. PM just means particulate matter, which I'm sure the previous sessions have explained this to us a lot. We also have the ozone, we have nitrogen dioxide, we have sulfur dioxide, and we have carbon monoxide. But aside everything else, we always just shout about carbon dioxide. We always shout about that because, of course, when it comes to emissions in the UNFCCC context, these are what we are talking about. And it will be interesting to know that even with emissions in every country, the sectors that are emitting more, it's also the sectors that are pollutant originations. When you look here, the vehicle emissions, which is key on the list, the natural burning, the natural forest burning, but then the human burning, the one we're so used to, burning car tires, burning rubbish and everything. But also, it also comes from our generation of energy. And so I sit in a position that, having worked in the energy sector and currently doing all things e-mobility and trying to promote clean transportation, I'm picking 2 of the huge areas that when it comes to emission, we are looking at. And then those are the same areas that feed into the quality of the air that we breathe. So this is just going to give us a background on what we have as a country and where we stand. So per WHO standards, clean air is what we have that contains the pollutants at a level that is not harmful to human health. And we've seen all the numbers being thrown around. WHO came out to say that 90% of the air that is being breathed is not clean. They've said Ghana, about 100% of our air is not clean, which sometimes I try to go back and forth to the WHO on this, because there are times when you monitor air quality in Legon alone, you're able to get something that is very, very good. So I'm wondering, how is it that every time 100%? But I think on the average, most of the air we breathe in Ghana is almost said to be almost 100% not clean. So this is our background to what we are talking about when we say clean air, and then when we say we have air pollution. And when we do have air pollution, where does that come from? There are pollutant originations, right? The areas it comes from. And when we do say that you do have unclean air, what are the things that you are finding in the environment that is making the air unclean? And that's what you have as some of the guidelines that I've mentioned are the key pollutants. So from what we have said, we understand that definitely we have a need to tackle clean air in Ghana. When we say we have a need, it's even beyond that. It's very crucial that we tackle clean air in Ghana. But I'm wondering why up till now we're still having challenges with clean air, and especially with, both industrial, residential, transport, all the areas we're having that. So if you look on the graph here, this is just a graph I picked from our emissions site. This is just supposed to show how much of emissions we are having around. And again, I tried to do the correlation in the earlier slide about when you are emitting, the areas that are high emitting are almost also the areas that are actually giving us a lot of unclean air or releasing a lot of pollutants into the air, right? So if we come to the country, as we say, we said, okay, we need clean air, but we don't have a clean air policy. There's no clean air policy in Ghana. And I've said that it's not it's not to point to anyone or say this one is supposed to do this. That's, again, I said that this is a discourse. It's not to point fingers, but having no clean air policy means that can we also rely on other policies? Yes, we can rely on it. But Ghana's air quality, as we have already said, is unacceptable. Well, okay, so if we're saying that Ghana's air is not clean, and we're saying, okay, now we need to do something about it. We understand that all the reports have pointed to the same thing. WHO says that 28,000 deaths in Ghana in 2019 or over 1 million deaths in Africa can be linked to clean. I think when we make these numbers, when we bring out these numbers, people tend to think it's far-fetched. But again, as I told you, a lot of things lead into the conversation of clean air. And so we are not able to sort of say, oh, when this guy went to this smoky area, that was what caused this, that was what caused this. We think it's just smoky area. Or we are not even able to say that somebody just had to breathe in nitrogen. So we can't also say that, oh, when you just went to breathe in this nitrogen oxide here, that is what led to this, or that's what led to that. You can't be able to speak clearly to that. And so most people think that they are not able to tell, and they think it's far-fetched when these numbers are being used. But these numbers are true, and these numbers are even a bit more, these data are a bit more, I would say, outdated. I don't like to use that word because I don't like to say data is outdated because we build on past data, but I like to bring in the very current data that I can source, right? So based on what I have here, if even at 2019, we have about 28,000 deaths, if we even extrapolate that based on the population growth of the country, assuming we even say the population is having 10% growth every year, and we're saying out of that 10%, a certain percentage of them will always go into this. If we're using this number based on that 10%, we can tell the growth of this, that it keeps increasing with time because it's also still being, we are having the same atmosphere, one atmosphere we're all breathing, one air we are all breathing, whether it's bad here or not, it's something that is affecting us all. And they're saying, again, the WHO guidelines did say that 100% of us in Ghana are exposed to PM 2.5 levels, which again, I mentioned in the earlier slide, that PM10, PM 2.5, and all of that, they are the pollutants. So I mentioned those. So if you are exposed to that, 100% of us, and of course, during Hamatan, people even say 200% of Ghanaians are exposed to PM 2.5. It just tells you, of course, the particulate matter here is very small, and that is what is leading that. But I want to also mention that given that Ghana is committed to reducing its GHG emissions, GHG here is greenhouse gas emissions, right? So if we are committed to reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, it directly links us to the air quality. Just in the previous slide, I linked those two. So if we now know that this is how it's going to be in our side, that, oh, we know that we've established that, okay, per WHO guidelines, our air is not clean. We've established that, or we know that per this, we don't really have a clean air policy in Ghana, but we do know that we can find a way to tackle this, because then again, if all of us are exposed to PM 2.5 levels that exceed WHO guidelines, then we are all at risk. So how do we do it? I want to come here and mention something, that although it is the mandate of one institution in Ghana that has this mandate, and that institution being the EPA here is the Environmental Protection Agency, it is not solely, I don't want to believe that it is just their burden to carry, because again, we are saying one atmosphere, we're all breathing the same thing. So if EPA doesn't do it, should we not rise up to the task as well? We should rise up to the task. Should we not do something, start anything and be able to do it? We should do that. And that's what I want to mention. But the EPA has the mandate by law to do this. The EPA has the mandate to be able to develop what we call the National Air Quality Management Plan, which we had one in 2018. It's currently being updated and is being funded by the World Bank and is being updated. I know the last update was supposed to have come up in 2022 or so, but it's still going through. Because when you have to update the National Air Quality Management Plan, it has to go to stakeholder consultations and mostly has to be regional consultations, which is what delays a lot of policy and regulations. It can take you about averagely 2 to 3 years to get that done, because you have to go region by region and go to as many places as possible before Parliament can even look at it, or before you can get it signed to become a plan or to become a strategy document or to become a standard. So that's what they're going to do with that. But there's already an air quality management plan, although it's outdated as of 2018 or about, and that plan did outline the measures to improve the air quality. Now, that plan, as it sits, the measures there, the reason why I didn't come to mention all the measures there is because the updated version is what we will need to look at in terms of the measures. But that, I want to mention that as one of the key documents that can help in us managing the air quality of the country, really. In addition to all others I'm going to mention, the fact that we know that there is no clean air policy, but we do know that there are others that can all lead to the same thing. One of them is a National Air Quality Management Plan, which you can see here. I want to come back to now talk about others, really, in terms of the policy. Again, we are all on that air quality related policy. I want to talk about the ambient air quality standards. Those standards, really, we have the vehicular standards, we have the noise. I think vehicular was 2018, noise was also 2018 or 2019. So all these standards come in. But one of the things I need to mention here is that when you have standards are not, you're not bounded by standards in a way. If you go to Ghana Standards Authority, they will tell you that when we adopt standards for the country, adaptation of standards helps us to know what the structure is, in which container you are supposed to be working, right? So if we have vehicular standards, it has to be that when you bring a vehicle within this is within that. But out of all of this, most of these standards now became what we could use in terms of trying to use them to make regulations, right? To formulate either policies. They feed our policies at the same time, they also feed our regulations, really. So this one of them is key on the list, the ambient air quality standards. At some point, I will mention the ambient air quality standards again. Of course, I've already mentioned the earlier slide that there is no comprehensive policy on air quality, clean air in that matter. But then the ambient point source emission guidelines, right? Is what is usually used for the industries, especially the environmental impact assessment system and the environmental management plan is what you want to use for the industries to be able to, especially the small and medium scale industries, because there is always a monitoring that goes on. As much as that monitoring, again, can we do better? Yes, we can. But currently, there are regular monitorings that go on, and that monitoring is under this guideline, those ambient air management guidelines. I also want to mention, although I didn't put it here, the energy policy, because see, one of the things I'll mention here when we are looking at how we are addressing air quality in terms of sectors is you see the top emitting sectors like energy and transport. Really, these sectors, if they are managed with policy in their own vein, it sort of benefits us when it comes to clean air. So I wanted to also mention the energy policy here. And I mentioned the EV policy, but on top of that, there should have even been, I should have also mentioned the transport policy, right? So the general transport policy and then the EV policy. So from policy, right? Now, if you know, I mean, all of these policy, but how then does air quality take place? I mean, we have spoken on this over time. We've spoken on how monitoring centers are. We know that there are some monitoring centers in some places. I have had the opportunity to see monitoring centers at the U.S. Embassy. There are monitoring centers, I think, the University of Ghana that I've also seen. And then there is another one, I'm told, the St. Joseph's School in Adabraka. I haven't seen that. And I think during the call, there were some other mentions of one in Tema and others, which we can also mention later. But I think the main thing about determining our air quality is the air quality monitoring, and then the monitoring network, and being able to continuously use those equipments to monitor. So first, with the equipment will have to be there. We have to have a whole monitoring system and being able to continuously monitor. But if we can't continuously monitor, or we can't get the right data from this equipment, what it means is that we are going to have false sort of data, or data we can't rely on to be able to analyze and even tell that a region has a very bad air quality, or this is what we can do about a region. There are also the things about when EPA or other institutions, sometimes EPA goes into institutions, especially the energy institutions, and they go with us, the Energy Commission sometimes. And those would have to mean that you have to do a compliance assessment for some of these very large institutions, right? And I'm saying that again, some of these institutions are so large and you are having the numbers that move from here to go there to be able to do some of these monitorings. But the monitorings will require that you meet a certain levels of emissions to be able to do the assessment. And then those monitorings will now be reported. And those reports will now require that either we make it a public data, which is not currently the case, or then you actually use that to have to fine the company, right? And most of these companies get fines on those in terms of the industrial sector. And when they are fined, then you have to now pay back to either EPA or the government through whichever agency it will take that to be able to do. So the key here we say is that there has to be monitoring centers, and that has been one of the veins of trying to push air quality in Ghana, because even if you got policy, you finally written policy document, how then do you translate that policy to make sense when it's out there? How then do you translate the policy to be able to affect the lives of the person that is supposed to affect? Because if we are trying to prevent deaths, yes, on a large scale we can do policy, but from the policy to the deaths, where do we come in? How do we make that work? And some of them is actually to be able to do monitoring and to be able to do compliance, but to be able to find people and be able to make public data as the data accessible to the public, which is another conversation that we had. So currently, I've just tried to explain to you what it means to have air, clean air, what it would generally mean according to WHO rules. I've tried to mention to you what the numbers are, especially with Ghana. I've tried to mention to you what which institution is in charge of most of what is happening in Ghana. And out of those, I've also tried to speak to you about other policy documents that actually affect the same things, that actually be able to lead us in the conversation for air quality. And I've told you some of the outline of the things that the EPA and other institutions that do this monitoring would be able to do when they go out to monitor some of these fields. And in that vein, I want to move on to talk about the sectors. And because it is in addressing the sector issues that we can also find a common ground to say, when we are speaking to people, when we are speaking to the public about this, we'll be able to do that and benefit us all. So addressing air quality by sectors, I would say three. I'm just picking three, but if we go back to where we started from, vehicle emissions, natural activities, and household fuel, natural events like forest fires, right? It's all here. But the pollutant origination, I didn't pick all of them. I only picked three to speak about. Big on the list, I picked industrial activities, vehicle emissions, and then household fuel. So in that sectoral way, I will talk about the industrial emission standards. Right. Again, as I mentioned in the earlier way, the institution in charge here will now set and enforce industry emission standards. I think anytime we're talking about air quality, today I've been on the phone with both past and current directors of EPA air quality team, and it's one of the things I'm hoping we can be able to do, to have a chat with EPA, because I think it's a conversation that needs to be had in a very beautiful and cordial and diplomatic way to understand what has been done, how it's being done, and what could be done more, and where we all can come in with or without money, with or without resources in our own vein, how we can all do it, really. So when it comes to industrial emissions, we know that the EPA sets the enforces the industrial emission standards that limit air pollution. So I think I was at Barcamp in Tema. No, sorry, it's called Connect in Tema, where I try to explain some of these things, that the standards, the emission guidelines that are set. So in this place, we mentioned the EP ambient and point source emission guidelines, right? These emission guidelines is what you want to use to be able to enforce when it goes to the industry. So the industry then will now have to comply with these standards that is monitored through regular inspection and audit. And that again is what I mentioned in the previous slide here, that we have continuous monitoring from EPA, and sometimes with other institutions. Again, it's not every institution that has to go with the EPA, but of course, if EPA is going to an agri field, right, and they know that there is a mission from that field, they are going to have to go. Hello? Hello?
Go ahead, Doris.
So if EPA is going to an agri field, for instance, right, EPA would then have to go with people from either maybe going to for some support from the Forestry Commission to go ahead with. When EPA is going to maybe energy institutions or energy industries, right, it would then have to probably go with people from the agencies here with the Energy Commission or others. And that monitoring is what I was talking about, that there has to be regular inspection and audits of these. As to the level of the inspections that happen, as to how regular it is, it has to be one of the conversations we pick up with the EPA, right? So with that in mind, some of the policies and things that are being done in Ghana and how they tackle that reduction of emission in the industry is really when I talked about the National Point Source Emission Guidelines. It's the same guideline I'm referring to here. So when you want to pick one whole industry, let's just pick one industry in Tema, for instance. The industry is probably running gas, right? It's firing gas to be able to feed the electricity that it is using. If we take that industry as a complete entity on its own, we can say that what impact could that industry have on the environment? So that industry may be switching from that sort of gas to renewable. Could that not be the first point of emission reduction? Yes, it goes purely solar and it can be able to move away from gas. But again, it has to be a cost element and it has to be an incentivized method, which is why right now renewable has become a case in point that we need to push further. One of the programs that is pushing renewables is the SHREP program. It's a program that is being funded by the AFD and is pushing it through the angle of a net metering policy project. So such that when most people go into renewable energy on their buildings or in their offices or in their whole industry, what they want to see is that when I'm not using the electricity that I generate from the solar, should it go waste? If I'm not able to buy batteries, when we know that the lithium ion batteries that need to store some of this electricity is what is the huge amount, right? So if you don't have that money to be able to put into a lithium ion battery, what other means could you use? And some of the means is what we're talking about here in terms of when you do a net metering, it allows you to give back to the grid, right? So that you don't, I mean, before you just give back to the grid and you don't get anything back, you're just giving back, because it's either you give back to the grid. And when I mean the grid, I mean our grid network. So so it's either you're giving back to that or you are throwing that electricity out because you're wasting it, you're not storing it anyway. But in doing what we are doing in terms of the net meter, it means that when you give to the grid, you can be able to net it so that what you are paying at the end of the time will become more reasonable over time, because then you will not be wasting your electricity, and on top of that you'll be getting money back for it, but not physical cash in a way. So one of them in terms of industry would be installation of renewable energy, and so it requires investment. That's what we talk about. And energy efficiency incentives, the subsidies, the rebates, energy efficiency in buildings, the whole project, it has to make sense to the industry person. And most of the time people are used to what they are used to without wanting to change. But you would be surprised just in an industry or in an office space where, I mean, in my house, for instance, my windows are like half of my house. So when I wake up and I open my windows, I don't need lights. I've never needed light in a long time until I have to come back and I want to use light for something. It means my air conditioning may not be used for as long as possible. It will mean that until I need air conditioning. The only times I'm finding myself closing my windows is when it's harmattan and the air is so dry and it's dusty. Then I'm having to find another way of. But it will also mean that in your room, you don't want to only have air conditioning, you want to have fans as well, because it's an energy efficient mechanism of not always relying on the air conditioning, but having a fan to be, whether it is modern or it's not modern, we're looking at what makes sense for the environment, what makes sense. And those are some of the efficiency in building. Chunk of our cost in terms of electricity, and this whole feeds back to air quality, because when we are burning too much on the fuel in generating electricity, where is it going? It's going back into the air. But when we are reducing our intake and we are not having to do that, and we are going renewable or going the option that makes sense for the environment, especially in the industry, in the schools, a school just changing all of their light bulbs to just their light bulbs, I'm not saying anything, just their light bulbs to LED light bulbs, it's enough to actually cause them to reduce their consumption. Most people only understand it from their consumption in terms of what they pay, but we as air quality ambassadors, we as who we know we are, we don't even need to be air quality ambassadors. We are all those who are involved in the environment, understand that it is beyond just the money, it is what benefits the earth, is what benefits the environment that I want to talk about. So if in terms of that, to their actions, in terms of compliance and regular monitoring, as I told you. But when it comes to the building efficiency, again, the building codes are being done again. I'm talking to some of the guys at the buildings that they're trying to even incorporate again all these things about charging stations and everything into it. It takes time, but I'm hopeful that in a couple of years we'll have all this thing, all the building codes and standards all up, and then that can be, as we have done it with the labeling of the Ghana electric appliances here. I mean, that being championed by the Energy Commission, you know, it's the fridges, now all of the appliances. Now we have 20 plus appliances, the air conditioners, the like, a lot of appliances are all being put into that same program. But imagine what it could do to a building in an industrial sector. Aside the fact that they stop emitting through just their electricity generation for the factory itself. Imagine the offices in those buildings all go more efficient, all go building efficient. Imagine what that will mean to us. But again, most people need to be incentivized to move. They need to be incentivized to move, everybody moving away from a particular point. But the industrial sector and the incentivization to move away from there is one of a huge, it's quite a huge burden, because most people, based on how they ship things into the country, would like to be closer to the coast than being so far, because the cost of moving their raw materials from there to their factories is also going to be quite expensive. And so in making sure they can move away from that, you'd have to incentivize them for the loss that they are going to have. If we all move away from the more populated areas into less populated areas, it helps us to manage that. We also have what we call the fuel substitution. I mean, it's more like saying, instead of going again, that was what I was saying about gas, right? You could either move purely from using HFOs. HFOs is the heavy fuel oil. The heavy fuel oils are releasing more in terms of emissions and in terms of making your air not clean. So if you move away from HFOs to LPGs and CNGs, it's better off. But then further than that is even you going for electricity, which is why I have been promoting electric cars on the road, not just normal electric cars, but the public transport should be electric, and those conversations are still in the noon. So for industry, we see that it's quite big. Now, if all industrial policies do work, what it means is that every industrial policy working benefits us in terms of air quality. Whether there is an air quality policy or not, when industrial policy works, when industrial guidelines work, it benefits us here in terms of air quality. So I'll go to the next one, which is household emissions. So again, indoor burning is one of the things that we have spoken about. And most of the projects I did with the WHO, again, were on indoor burning. And we know that it's been established that is the single largest contributor to our negative health in Ghana. And we know how much we rely on this when we are cooking. This is a household. These people are indoors within their household. And this is not far-fetched. All the pictures here are from Ghana. These pictures are from Ghana. And it's not far-fetched. So you are asking yourself, how could we move away from it? In this case, when you look at this, you can clearly state that, oh, these people are going to be exposed to a lot of pollutants, really. Yes, but we, even those not in that areas, are equally going to be exposed to pollutants because it's going to move towards our side as well, right? And we've established all the numbers from the WHO. But then how can we move this to be able to get to clean air? So that is where you get to all the clean cooking measures that have to be there. I picked this graph from the project I did with the WHO. Is cited at the back, so we can look at it later. But from this, what we were trying to say is that, hey, our policies in Ghana, we have we have where we are, which is the business as usual, the BAU. We want to be a bit more progressive. Then we want to go more progressive with tier 4 charcoal stoves. So even the charcoal stoves that you have, the improved charcoal stoves, they are all in levels. Some are not even, they're worse off, right? And some are better. So you want to be able to go for the charcoal stoves that are way better. I mean, that consume less, because it is the link between the improved charcoal stove is the consumption of less charcoal for what you're doing, because the more you are burning, again, the more you are causing indoor air pollution. So it's that reduction. And what we see how much we are going to reduce in terms of dollars and in terms of the daily lives that are going to be saved in this case, right? So this is what we're looking at. But when people see this, what we see is it's just a graph, it's just projection, it's just we running models and coming up with this. But if 95% of the burns that occur in low-income areas come from indoor, and if we are saying exposure to smoke and cooking fuels results in about 3.8 million deaths annually, then why are we not doing anything about that? That is why clean cooking is also one of the biggest initiatives that can be able to help our clean air. So that initiative working well, again, feeds back into our clean air. And that's where we do. How do we do that? That's what we've been pushing. That's why you hear more of LPGs. But LPGs, as it is, even when you go to the rural areas and you give them LPG, you have to, it goes beyond that. The conversation I always ask is, after the LPG, what? Then what? When next do we go? I ask myself, after clean air campaign, then what? Are we done being clean air ambassadors? No, it's forever, right? So we're looking at the introduction of all of this in terms of the improved cook stoves. When I told you that they have to be at the tiers that make sense, the tiers that use less fuel and burn less, and then you have to promote LPG. Currently, Ghana's promotion of LPG, the idea is to get to about 50% by 2030. And hopefully do more than that. But if everybody is able to get onto LPG, not necessarily electricity, because of course you're looking at the cost of these people being able to maintain electricity for cooking, right? So LPG seems to be the more viable option, because if you are going coal, for instance, your emissions from coal, if you move on to gas, you emit 50% less than what you have been emitting from coal. So if from the same understanding, we are looking at the fact that you're going down to charcoal, right, and you're coming onto LPG, you're emitting less than that. So we are looking at, in terms of the promotion of rural electrification, in terms of cleaner fuels, again, that's the LPG we are talking about, and more for those that use. I know a few people in Ghana who use electricity to cook. I have tried to understand their point, it makes sense, but we know when we say cooking, we all use electricity to cook in a way. Our microwaves are cooking, water heaters are cooking, our sandwich makers are cooking, our coffee makers are cooking. All of those things are forms of cooking. So in a way, it is being said that we use both electricity and gas in Ghana for that, really. And that is another way to be able to come back to get our clean air. The last one I want to talk about is transportation policies. I think it's been a case that we all know that the three main being energy, but transport is the biggest issue. And I would want to, in that case, probably show us a video if it's okay with us. A video I was just listening to couple of minutes ago.
Political interference and lack of education is emerging as significant obstacles hindering the full enforcement of environmental regulations aimed at managing air pollution in Ghana. This revelation surfaced during a workshop held in Takoradi, where researchers and relevant agencies tasked with implementing the laws convened to discuss pressing barriers. Air Quality Beat reporter Michael Ashali has more in the following report.
Emissions from industry and manufacturing contribute heavily to air pollution in Ghana, but close to half of the country's pollutants are attributable to road transport, particularly on urban roads. Former Director of Air Quality at the EPA, Emmanuel Apo, attributes this to the increased vehicle population and poor driving behavior.
Our attitudes on the roads are very bad. People tend to drive anyhow. If you don't drive well, mention vehicular maintenance challenges also there because of funding. People buy vehicles but don't have the money to maintain them very well. You have plumes of smoke coming out of that, and also you have wear and tear from vehicles that are not maintained very well.
In Ghana, there are still obstacles hindering the full enforcement.
So I will come back to the obstacles later, and I will also share the link to this. But I wanted to ask to get to understand the level of which road transport emission is one of the key areas that impact us here in Ghana. The recent data I took from Ghana Customs, which was earlier this year, showed that about 85% of our, 83 if I'm exact, of our vehicles are all imported. And they are imported as used vehicles. And from what Mr. Apple was even trying to say on that video, aside the fact that how we drive, the wear and tear on the road and all of that contribute to it, it's also a case of the kind of vehicles we are bringing in. And that has been one of the major problems in terms of our air pollution when it comes to Ghana. So we know, first of all, the vehicle emissions are a major source of all that we mentioned earlier as a pollutants. And we know that transportation sector, the dominant form of accounting for 95% of our transport sector. We know that our road transport is a junk of it. We don't really have rails, neither do we rely a lot on boats to transport us from Tema to Takoradi. Nobody goes to take a boat to go to Tema to Takoradi. We don't get to do that. We don't get to take rails. It's always road transportation here, and it's always that. So the conversation around how to improve clean fuel, and that was where you saw why I came up with this whole Drive Electric initiative. It goes beyond just, it was about using energy sustainably for me, but it went beyond that in terms of it was about having a sustainable transportation movement here in Ghana. It was about getting us to understand the importance of the air we breathe and the value of what we have around us as the air that we are breathing. So anything that is green initiative that can push us into be able to understand that our roads need to be that or that we have to be going on. People don't even take their vehicles for checkup. But the whole conversation around electric vehicles, it all stems from this. Because when you go to cities that have all of the EVs in their numbers, we know that you enter Geneva, we are saying, oh, the air in Geneva is air, then the air in India is not air. We say it all the time. The Indians say when you are on the road, just by being on the road, you'd have smoked 10 cigars or something of that sort. We hear all of these things, but then how do we move from there? Because policies here in Ghana have tried, and it continues to do more, but there has to be more. Because in doing that, we want to be encouraging some things, electric vehicles. We want to be encouraging public transportation system. We want to be encouraging other forms of transportation. I always have this picture I share of when you have one bus on the road, it could cover the space of about 100 small cars in that scene. Because if a bus that is 100-seater is on the road and you have about 100 cars, it means that if that bus is on the road, had everybody sitting in that bus been driving a car, you would have had 100 cars. That is congestion. That is emissions in the high level. That is air pollution so much. But in tackling this and going a bit more, having a good transportation system, it helps to address this. And that's where you have the BRT systems coming into Ghana. And that also, again, got on its knees at some point. It's about also modernizing our public fleet, and it's about using alternative fuels for vehicles, and which, again, the alternative fuels for vehicles is where I mentioned electric vehicles, but also about CNG and all the others, right? It's about trying to come up with policies that can be able, or initiatives that can be able to help us to move. And so it is because of this, again, where I say things like the Drive Electric Initiative, it doesn't on its own solve all our problems, but it starts from somewhere. And that's one of the things I believe we do by being policy actors. We are being people who go out there and work to advocate for things to be done. It's not necessarily that people see it or people like it. People don't need to like it. You need to start a movement. You need to start an initiative. You need to start something that helps us tackle us in a way. So look at all these cars who will be on the road. Where is their emissions? One clear thing about an electric vehicle, a pure electric vehicle, is that you don't even see an exhaust fume, because it doesn't emit the tailpipe emissions of an electric vehicle. It's not there. And so anytime you see an electric vehicle, somebody tells you it's a pure electric vehicle, which I mean here, a battery electric vehicle, not a hybrid. Just go to the back and see if there is a tailpipe emission side. There is none, because the whole car is a battery. So there's no engine, there is nothing that is ever going to at some point be. So you actually make sure that your roads are even able to come from that clean section. It doesn't need to be the vehicles alone. You can see motorbikes, the 2- and 3-wheelers. They are all electric. We are meaning that all our 2-wheelers on our roads that every 2 minutes are pouring all of this smoke in our faces and pushing it all over. It could be minimized using what we have here in terms of electric 2-wheelers and all. But again, through this initiative, we are trying to say, what are we contributing to the clean energy sector, to the transport sector, to the clean air sector? What are we trying to use to replace the internal combustion engines? Then that could be electric vehicles, right? But to actually get people to use electric vehicles, we have conversations. That is another conversation we may have to pick up a whole day on its own, because then you are looking at the price of the electric vehicle, you're looking at the total cost of the electric vehicle. But aside that, you're looking at the availability of charging for those vehicles. And even if there are charging, you want to make sure that the charging stations meet a certain level of standards. You want to make sure there are regulations to go and enforce. So that on its own creates a whole new set of policies and implementation plans that need to happen. And that's why I would encourage everybody here to also just pick a copy of the EV policy document. It's on the Ministry of Transport website. It took us quite a number of years to come up with that. But from that policy document, there are implementation points and strategies. And then you, as an ambassador, also knows where you play, the role you're playing in that sector and how to push it forward. Again, I'll mention some of the other road transport initiatives. Of course, we know the transport policy itself. We know the vehicle emission standards. We know what these standards were meant to do to reduce the pollutants the pollutants that were emitted. Again, we've mentioned these pollutants at the first slides when we started. But one of the things we had to know is that the 10-year limit on vehicles for us was a big push, because at that time when Ghana was purely and more encouraging, the customs duty was on the price of vehicles without any primitive measure or no punitive measure for those that are bringing cars beyond 30 years, 20 years, and the rest. We're just looking at the price of these cars. Cars that are 30 years and 20 years and beyond were cheaper, and so their customs duties were small. And so limiting it to 10 years made it that aside you paying your customs duties, you pay a penalty for bringing a car. And the penalty is so huge enough, it becomes a deterrent that you don't go that way, rather, but you bring cars that are less than 10 years. There is even a new wave coming in where it goes to 5 years, and that has been adopted at the ECOWAS level. And on that level, one of the African countries, just one African country, is currently implementing that. Hopefully, so many other African countries will come on board and start implementing those. Now, when they all start implementing those, the 5-year policy will mean that vehicles ban for us in Ghana will no longer be 10 years, but will be 5 years. It is just a matter of time for us to implement. It's not a matter of adopting it. It's a matter of implementation, because it is something that is already started, and we just have to find a way to come to terms with it as a country. And again, I mentioned this already, the electric vehicle policy that is helping us for EV adoption. We know our fuel content, that was another milestone, because in reducing the sulfur content in your fuel, it meant that our air quality became better, because anytime you see a car burning in those days, the amount of lead that was being thrown into the atmosphere was so much, right? Now you're bringing it down, and that helps us in terms of our air pollution. Again, public transport, I've mentioned that already, and the implications of public transport on congestion, as well as on our clean air, and also that on the pollution on the road. Really, the actions that we can take to also improve, apart from public transport, is including the sidewalks in Ghana, and then the bike lane. I'm always a proponent of the 15-minute city as a concept, and I mean, I can later expand on it if somebody wants to know about it. So the role of advocacy, now that we've heard about everything, we know that we understand what the air pollution is, we understand what it entails for us as a country, we understand the high emitting sectors in our country. We've seen some of the policies that are in place, the documents, the standards, the guidelines, we've heard a bit of it. Now, how do we take it all? Now that we know how we can come in, I would say the role of policy starts with you. It just starts with us. It's up to you to just plant a tree, and not just say, I can't plant a tree where I live, there's no tree. Use a potted plant. It's up to you to make sure your windows are that open. It's up to you to make sure you are not using excessive electricity and burning out when you don't need it. It's all the small things that we can tell others. It starts with us. So I believe that when we become advocates of sustainability, when we become sustainability proponents ourselves, it's easier for us to sell it to others, and how they also become sustainable, elements for the country. But again, I'll start from the institutions that can do this for us, that are doing this and continue to do this. EPA is one of them, and it finds a way of trying to speak to health authorities, and some campaigns, especially, we've had more campaigns on the cook stoves, because then they were new, there were things that people didn't understand, right? But we have more work to do in terms of advocacy, really. Advocating and doing public awareness in terms of what could benefit people requires investment. It requires money. You have to be able to push money onto that. And when a department or unit or a group of people are not that well funded, they say they can't get it done, right? Because it is required to pay them to go out there to do, because it becomes a job. But when we move away from public awareness and advocacy becoming a job, like where it is for EPA, when we move away to us, where it is just becomes a lifestyle for us, then we go there and we become the people that push. There have been several campaigns, and I just mentioned some of them, like the Obatambwafo, the cook stove one, the Mother's Helper. It's supposed to speak to the people in the communities for what they can do. There was the Breathe Life campaign, the urban health, during the urban health initiative, we did the whole Breathe Life campaign. Luckily, then it was with the AMA boss. We had to go to Jamestown. We had to get the people to understand in their own language what it means to be burning is on such a large scale, and the implications of that indoors for them. So more and more of such should be done, because to be able to influence behavioral change, it starts way beyond there. We know it's like when the WASH campaign is one of my favorite, because it started from the classrooms all the way for some of these students to leave the classroom to go and be telling their parents. Really, it started from the 3-2-year-olds just understanding that you just need to wash your hands or get sanitized, get that. But more of it had to move through. They had to understand and let the kids get to know the implications of what that is going to do for their air or that. So I believe that what I want to say here is, as much as there are institutions that do this, there are what we can do. We, in being ambassadors, it's a lifetime ambassadorial job that you are taking. It's a lifetime unpaid ambassadorial job. Let me put it that way. You're not paid, but once you make it a lifestyle, it becomes something you can do. I want to also highlight another project being the pollution management and health program, which also trying to support it from doing technical assistance to pollution management facilities, and trying to raise awareness, right, especially among both the community leaders and all of those others, and then the institutions that needed to push those. But again, these projects, just as I call them, they are projects, they end at some point, because we have to find people that can carry it beyond where their lifetimes are, right? But this wasn't part, but because I spoke about all of these things, I feel that we need to also acknowledge when we want to advocate and you have more knowledge about what it means, what it means to you, or you have more knowledge about what the challenges are, you can find a way to be able to address it better. Because when you understand that it's a social conditioning of people to do things a certain way, you don't go trying to attack them, or you don't go trying to speak to them from a very high horse area, right, or a very high-handed area, and be sounding more condescending towards them. You want to be able to understand, if you get this idea, social conditioning, maybe recondition them by doing it the way that you would have liked them to do. It's like a child, where a child learns by rather seeing what we are doing rather than what we tell them. So if we are doing it by people, they probably can learn from us and get it done the way it's supposed to be. So I think there are a lot of challenges. I don't plan to speak more about the challenges, but I thought I'd just mention some of them, and some was mentioned on the video in terms of political interference, which once there are institutions that are in charge of this, there will always be political interference. And once we have political parties that would come in every 4 years, new leaders will come in, there will always be that. It's not just Ghana. Political interference is everywhere, in the global north countries, in the global south countries. Everyone gets this on their plate when it comes to their challenges of implementing certain policies like this, climate change, air quality. These things, they all come to the same conversation. But high on the list, I would say, for us in Ghana, is social conditioning and the lack of education. And that's why, as ambassadors, I feel you have a very rare honor and a very privileged position to take this as a lifetime job that is not paid. And you would become it just by saying it. That's what I've become, because having been a proponent of this, it means when I am getting my house, I have to do it the way I want to. If I'm coming to my office, I have to make sure I bring a plant along. I have to do this. I'm doing this. It's not that I have to, but it becomes part of you, and you become the advocate that is the pastor that does what you are preaching to the people to do. Really, there are more of these challenges, but I think the top of, apart from these ones, I mean, which we are already conversant with in terms of the high cost of living, that really affects people in trying to get electric vehicles and all of those conversations. And that could actually be tackled with electric buses, which is another conversation that we are already in talks about. But this is some of the things that affect in terms of collecting data. The inadequate funds, logistics for air quality management to roll out this in the regional capitals. We only hear most of it in Accra, but even Accra is lacking, let alone the regional capitals, right? The public education of health workers, really, the ones that are in the rural areas, that are the face off. So they can actually even become our ambassadors and our champions, because if you go to some areas, like I've been to an island somewhere in Edem, where the whole island, I was there the whole morning, I think 2 days after. My sister works there, and there was no doctor that had come in, and it was all the midwives and the nurses that were in charge of the whole island for God knows how many. Now they become our preachers. They become the health workers that can carry the message of awareness and advocacy around. But also key on the list I've spoken about quite some time is the damages to the air quality monitoring stations. Either it is by the vehicular accidents, or sometimes construction sites works, destroy some of this equipment, or some of them are just stolen. Really, it's just being stolen, and that will have to be creating other ways in which to prevent all of this from happening. That also becomes another funding and investment that has to go towards it, really. And if you don't have the air quality monitoring station, we ask ourselves, what then is left for us to do? How do we collect the data that is going to influence what we do? So these are challenges, but I don't think the challenges are meant to not make us feel we can do the job, but they're supposed to equip us for us to understand what we are getting into so we can do advocacy well. A well-informed person is a better advocate. So thank you so much. I believe one thing that we are all advocates of clean air. We are all implementers. So my question then is, what will we do? What do you plan to do? What is the initiative you want to push on? And it should be beyond the campaign. What are we doing beyond the campaign? Can we become advocates who are advocates ourselves, first for ourselves, for our families, and then for the world? Can we, when we post on social media, not look at the fact that whether it's not liked or liked is the impact, the people who see it and be able to read it and get to understand what is being said and can follow up with questions. That's what we are looking forward here. Right after the video, because I was trying to get us to understand the impact of transport. So this is a slide that came where I mentioned the numbers, and I encourage saying public transportation has to be one of our go-to. And this is when I spoke about the initiative and why I started the initiative and why the initiative has become more like a nationwide initiative now is because we've come to understand the role of electric vehicles in terms of sustainability for both transport and energy use. And I mentioned some of the transport policies here, where I talked about the limit on used vehicles in the National Electric Vehicle Policy, and I talked about so many others, right? And I mentioned the 15-minute cities and all. I'm sure that family will be sharing the slides to everyone. I'll make the slides available because it's for us all. And then I came to talk about the role of advocacy, where I said beyond the EPA has that role to be able to push public awareness, but then we start advocacy from ourselves as individuals, then we now be able to take it to the public, really. And I mentioned the campaign, some of the campaigns, and one of them being the notable Sea Watch campaign. And I said how that was quite impactful because you were doing to make others do. So, and I mentioned this health program as well. And I mentioned how important it is to include the health facilities in the conversations, because with them, we get to understand that they have a direct access to the people who are out there in the field. So I mentioned some of these challenges, and I mentioned how crucial political interference is in some of these policies, having the light of day and the implementation possibilities being almost low. I mentioned further to this, I mentioned the damages to the equipment, I mentioned the poor electrical supplies, I mentioned the inadequate funds, all of that. So they were all on this slide. And I went ahead to call on all of us as advocates. And I mentioned that if we are all saying we are implementers, one thing I've said is that when a policy document is written, as much as there are institutions that they will mention there as in charge of this, in charge of that, it's like the laws of Ghana. When we need it as individuals, we go for it to use. So that same policies, we can draft our initiatives out of that. The policy documents become a way of helping you to know some of the initiatives you can craft as people around. And it actually gives you backing, because when you are selling those initiatives to funders, you are able to say, based on Ghana's policy on this, we are doing this, and I've come up with this that should be able to meet up this. And I believe our initiatives in our own way, campaigns in our own way, all come together, because we have to look at it beyond advocacy, beyond this project being done, advocacy into the future, becoming our own advocates and seeing how this can go. You know, when you want to be able to push stuff on the social media, how you want to be able to push that beyond the likes and go for the impact and the views, right? In the same way, when we want to do this, we want to go beyond what it is and then see how we can push this conversation forward. So this was where I ended, and I asked that as advocates and as implementers, what can we do? What do you think you can do? And how do you think you can come up to make this a success? So I said, start an initiative. Any initiative, it's okay. These are the references, and the video I played as well is available here for you to see. You can just pick the links from here and you're good to go. Thank you.
Doris, thank you very much for your presentation. I think that it's now time for us to receive questions from the participants and then discuss. There's already a debate brewing in the chat. I think this is coming from Christabel. So I think because of the noise, we made it impossible for people to unmute themselves. But Christabel, if you can kindly unmute yourself and then ask your question or state your point, that would be great. Are you able to speak? Anyway, so the issue is around what is the primary driving factor, where we are talking about lack of awareness and education versus, for example, financial constraints. So if you look at the sources of pollution, we are talking about vehicles, we are talking about household cooking, etc., as the main drivers. Is it that the issue is awareness because people are not aware, or the issue is financial because they can't afford to do the right things?
Can you see my slide?
Yes.
Okay. When I got here, I said I wasn't speaking to challenges. I was only speaking to advocacy, but I thought I'll list some challenges for us to muse over later. So this is not an exhaustive list, and this is not in order of importance. On this page, everything here is very important. The funding is equally there. The high cost of electric vehicles is there. The lack of education is there. They are all contributing factors. None of them is more important than the other. But I try to point out a simple example of where you go to a rural area, which I have done, giving people LPG, the whole LPG gas and everything, right? And the person says, no, I'm not going to use that because it never does my food the way I want it to do. And you say everything, the cost of getting the LPG has been covered. The cost of getting the stove, everything has been covered, but the person will not use it. So I was just giving you examples, and those are the ones that even become difficult to get through to because that's the person's conditioning. The Jamestown ladies, no matter what I tried to do to a couple of them, refused because they said when they smoke the fishes some other ways, it doesn't work this way. When they cook beans on gas, it doesn't taste well because beans, when it's cooked on charcoal, tastes better to them. Everybody has a conditioning around some of this, and those ones. Again, when it comes to funding, when we get funding, when we get money, we can support it. The ones that go beyond the one that you know how to get an answer to is the one that I'm trying to say that even becomes some of the ones we don't talk about, but it's quite difficult to try to get around because it's a conditioning that the person has had for quite a long time. And by they seeing you do, they can learn from you. It doesn't take away from funding at all. Funding is also in the list here. And the high cost of the electric vehicles and all the cooking equipment is equally here. And that is also captured in the funding. And that is also exacerbated by the high cost of living, as you can see on the list.
Okay, thank you very much for the explanation. I think that, Christopher also gets it. I think this also speaks to one of the first sessions we had where we are talking about social and behavior change communication. You see, the context in which you find yourself influences your knowledge, first of all, and then secondly, your ability to change. And there's always a balance between capability, which has to do with your knowledge and your skills, and your opportunity that you have, which has, for example, to do with maybe your finances and other things, and then of course your motivation to perform or do the right behavior.
Yes, that's true.
Are there any other questions?
No need for only questions. Contributions are also welcome because I think it's an open page.
Yeah. Okay. So one of the things that I was thinking about when we are talking about this topic about policy and advocacy was one of the things, sorry, let me go back before I make other inputs. One of the things that I found really insightful about this presentation was just to kind of like really understand where the drivers of the pollution are. And we've had this same conversation in our earlier sessions, especially during the Barcamps, etc., where we are learning more about the contribution of transport, industrial emissions, and then also energy use as drivers. Another one that came out very strongly was the waste system, the waste management system when it comes to pollution. So that automatically means that if we want to come out, make suggestions around policy improvements, we can also focus on those sectors, right? Here you talked extensively about the transport sector, for example, being contributing to about 50% of the pollution, if I heard you right. So if we pick transport and we can figure out ways in which we can reduce exposure to air pollution through transport, we are literally going to cut down substantially on the air pollution, which means that also advocating for policies can be focused, not entirely focused because everything is linked, but can also be targeted at some of these sectors and kind of like be able to address certain issues around those sectors. Yeah. So this
I'm sorry, I was just going to add to that and say I've put something on the website now. It's called Ghana's BUR. It's the Biennial Update Report of Ghana. It's on the UNFCCC website. When you get to the website and you go to countries, you pick Ghana, you go to downloads, you pick our latest download. Now, in that report, you will see emissions by sectors, and you see the highest emission sectors. That should be able to inform what you are saying in terms of which ones to go directly for, and then which areas will give you the highest impact in terms of what you want to do.
Yeah. So this leads me to my question in terms of just like looking at advocacy, for example. So if I don't know, I pick a particular sector and I want to do an advocacy campaign, let's say that the advocacy that I want to do has to do with engaging government on bringing down the cost of LPG so that people can afford more LPG to reduce pollution from, how do you call it, solid fuel use. How do I go about the advocacy?
For that, you would then have to not just, okay, so for that advocacy, you have to look at it from a holistic point of view. There are two ways. You can decide to go through government, but again, sometimes for us and for the funding we have to do some projects, you can decide to go through it directly to the people, but with government's blessing, because it makes it easier for you to do that. Now, if you want to get people to come to LPG, it's two things. It's education and it's the availability of the LPG, and is the price reduction of LPG. So one of the main problems when we saw in terms of pushing LPG, when it got to the 28%, 30% range, we're not getting it to push further. And you're seeing that most of it was just in the Greater Accra region. And pushing that, you realize that it is not going above that again. What was the problem? Number one, it was the price of the LPG. Every time there's a high cost of LPG, every time LPG cost increases because of exchange rates and all of that, it affects the average person that needs to buy LPG. They quickly then switch from LPG to go back to charcoal, which is easily affordable for them. So you want to find a way to be able to either buffer the price. And that was why government was pushing subsidies to a point, but subsidies has to be removed to see the real cost of what is happening in terms of how long can a government keep subsidizing a field. What is subsidies? I mean, there's been so much literature on subsidies. The fact that it had an opposite effect when you release the subsidies, you realize people don't even patronize what you want again. So either you lead them to go that way from that point, from the beginning. So that price element was there. Then it was the availability of it and how to actually get it. And all the conditioning people had about it in terms of bends, and people felt they were never going to use LPG because they've had somebody die out of LPG, all this conversation. So the price was a factor. Then making the LPG available to them was. And so you can see that there's currently something going on about LPG bottling, where when you go, you are not supposed to just sit there and fill. You get the LPG, you just hand over an empty LPG container, and then you get a filled one. So you are not the one getting that LPG. You're not even getting to breathe the gas at any point in time. And that's one of the tools that were used and is still being used to address that. So LPG, the bottle, the cylinder doesn't belong to you. It would belong to the cylinder company. So when you go, you're just getting gas, going back, getting gas, going back and getting gas and going, so that there is no cylinder. So it's there's a name for it, the cylinder recirculation model, and it's currently being implemented. It had to take a while to put that together, and that is currently being implemented, but it's in its pilot phases. So if you get to the cylinder recirculation model, it tackles one other problem, the problem of how to make LPG available to people, and the problem of the gas and the safety issues around gas, which is key on people's list when you do that survey with them. So the pricing mechanism may be that you can do that, or you can either set up a whole chain of cylinder recirculation model for a village or an area and pump that LPG conversation to them by making it available to that area using the funding that you have. Or you can also go through the government. But then when you do that, it means that how the money will move will also become another conversation, and the channels through which the money will move to get to where you want it to get to and how it's removed will become. So I would say the direct benefits of the people should be, so you'll be able to get to those people and create that mechanism that works for them. I see a question, Kelvin. The top 3 policy priorities should be waste management and transportation, and household energy transition from biomass to LPG. The burning of waste is a big issue also. For starters, we can begin with activities like carpooling and gradual movement of public transportation. Making LPG affordable and accessible is a crucial point. Yes, Kelvin. Yes, it's just what I just said in terms of the LPG. Yes, the carpooling is another conversation. I know there are already a few carpooling starting going on. I've actually picked one from the Wager area to here. So you get to call them and you schedule. So you schedule and then they pick a group of people on that way from about 5 a.m. to about 7 a.m. will come to work. It's a mechanism that a group have started. I'll have to get the name of the group but it's in that case, people are able to park their cars at home and then join that because you are sure of the time they're coming. And then by 5 o'clock, you're sure that you're getting back home. So if in a day I know I'm not going to make any rounds at work or do much, I just have to park my car, call for carpooling, join that. And it's not even a carpooling per se, it's a bus pooling. I'll call that a bus pooling because it actually is a bus that carries a number of people with it, comes back here. And I thought everybody there didn't have a car, but there were a lot of people, including myself, that joined the bus. I had a car, but then we were willing to park the car and join for that day. So these are, just like Kelvin is saying, these are the things that we need to just get used to, because if we can do it elsewhere, why not be able to do it here as well? And waste management on top of the list. I didn't pick waste management a lot here. I didn't pick it as one because I thought if I had to pick all the 5, I was going to not finish my presentation anytime soon. So I just picked the top 3 emitters by that section, and then I dealt with them. But waste management is also big on the list, given what is happening when you get Agbevivi and the West. It even goes beyond just the normal waste, even the electronic waste and the implications of those electronic waste, the lead acid batteries and all those ones, and their implications on the air quality. So you can see all of the acts that have come in terms of, we have the EPA Electronic Waste Management Act. I think it's Act 917 or so. I stand corrected, but it's all those acts are actually helping to do that. But it's the implementation of the act beyond that. It is having individuals wanting to go into the waste recycling and waste management program, and being able to start that initiative and being able to push that in the future, it could become profitable. But when it comes to electronic waste, it's a whole conversation now, given electric cars, the batteries, and the possibilities of what that could happen in terms of black mass and what you can get back from that. So these conversations are key, and there's more to be had on this. Thank you, Kelvin.
Yeah, thanks. I think I would love to hear more from others on the call in terms of their experience when it comes to working on policy and advocacy related issues. And even if it's not directly clean air, I think I would still love to hear more. And certainly Kelvin can also speak to us in terms of the some of the policy and advocacy related work they are doing in Greater Accra. I think he's been a tremendous resource. I'm always calling him to give examples from their project. Fred can also share with us some of the work that he's done in the past when it comes to engaging policy directly, or even engaging the public around policy related issues. I know that he has some work in the pipeline when it comes to environmental safety and the coming elections. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that. But then I will just maybe slide in another question that came to my mind, which is that if you
Let them share first, or you don't want them to share for us to hear? Because
no,
I'm keen to
then I
hear
forget
them.
my question. So the campaign that we are doing, Clean Air Ghana campaign, you know, those of us on the grassroots and the communities trying to engage around these issues, how can we find ourselves within the sort of mainstream policy spaces? How does the government go about certain policies? Is there a way that if we want to be more involved in the policy spaces so that we can, how do you call it, suggest our ideas and promote our ideas to be taken up? How do we go about it?
One of the key areas is anytime the policy document is done, you cannot get the policy signed by any minister unless the policy has gone through stakeholder consultations. So anytime a policy document has to go through, a regulation has to get to Parliament, any one of them, there are boxes you have to tick and you have to show evidence that it is being done. That's why there are stakeholder consultations that happen all across. So I think GhanaThink, the Clean Air Group, would have to position themselves very well with the policymakers to be invited all the time for this, or to either put your ear on the ground, which I believe is not. I feel that when you have an established relationship with the actors, it makes, because I don't think it's about going to lobby. No, this is not a lobby. They should be inviting you. But you see, invitation is always limited to the number and the spaces that they have and the funding they have to do this stakeholder consultation. They can be able to, so they can be able to invite maybe a group of 50 or 100 people to say, okay, come up on board to review this document. But beyond that, you can only invite the people in the sector. For instance, I did a stakeholder consultation on baseline study. I had to invite the EV actors in the field. When we did the EV policy stakeholder, you have to invite EV actors. At every point in time is the room you have. The room can take 70, you invite 70 people or beyond that, because you cannot invite the whole Ghana into a room. So the thing is really being able to establish one good relationship with them. You can literally just send an email or letter introducing the GhanaThink to the institutions, a letter to EPA introducing the GhanaThink and saying this is what you have been doing and you would like an opportunity to collaborate. And I'm hoping that what I want to do with the EPA under this project would help you to build a relationship between the institution and yourself, because the EPA being the core institution in clean air management in Ghana, and you being GhanaThink and doing what you want to do in terms of air quality. There has to be that relationship that is built and established. I don't joke with relationships because network is everything. And based on that, you can be invited to a lot of stakeholders. They always want to pick your brain on documents, and that can make you be push all of these wonderful ideas that you have into the space.
Thank you very much. I think we've lost Kelvin, so I'll ask Fred if you would like to come in, or if anybody else wants to come in. Fredo.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think it's been a very good discussion. I've been following it, and thank you very much. I think in terms of the policy side, in terms of reaching out to policymakers, there's no kind of straight route. There are different ways you can use to reach them. As you hinted, we're currently trying as part of the upcoming elections, we will try and get policymakers interested in air quality issues and make it part of their manifestos and their campaign. And so we are currently working on trying to set up kind of a roundtable discussion with all the major political actors in the same room to discuss air quality and air pollution, and then how they should make it part of the campaign. And so hopefully that would happen over the next month or so, and that should lead to some meaningful progress in that regard. And we've already had some publications again in the pipeline to start that discussion. In the past, we've also tried, myself, Gameli, and others prior to the last election. Again, we tried something like that with trying to reach out to the public and so on and so forth, write some articles and so on to try and reach people. So I think it's incremental, it's as the problem is air pollution, as we know, is a silent killer. It's not like road accidents which make the headlines every day, or malaria and so on. So you need to give people a reason to understand that this is actually as important, if not more important, than some of the things that we are so worried about. So that's been the approach at the moment, and hopefully it's incremental, but we hope eventually it leads to meaningful progress in the policy direction.
Amazing work, Fred. Amazing work, because I like it, because regardless of what happens, it's even if policy people like myself, technical policy people, draft policies and get it done, it's kind of like a whole effort. You need the political actors to push some of these policies as well, in terms of so once you are we're able to get them all invested in the conversation. I would tell you, to get this whole e-mobility movement in the area to which it is today, I had to make sure I was seeing politicians, getting them all interested in the whole concept of electric vehicles. For you to today be hearing about it being said by this president or that, had to take a lot of, because when they join the conversation, there is a party. You want a party, because when there is a party, everybody is excited to come on board and do much. And unfortunately, that's the life we're living now. So even though there are clear evidence of what is happening and what we should do, we only want to jump on board when the party is getting exciting. And the party gets more exciting when you have the leaders and the politicians on board. So kudos on this. And I look forward to hearing more about it.
All right, sure. We'll keep going. It's a gradual process. But we'll get there. I'm sure we'll get there.
We will get there. So Christabel, you can get the act, the E-Waste Act, and then the regulation. So the E-Waste Act is Act 917. It's supposed to be just available once you Google it. It's online. And then there is an act that is giving that there's a regulation that is backing that with the fines set out in that. So once you do that, you Google the regulation, it also gives you that. And in that whole document, there is not a policy document yet. A policy document on e-waste, not necessarily recycling, but recycling is part of it, right? Because now the E-Waste Act actually has mandated the creation of an e-waste fund. There's a name for the fund. I think it's an e-fund or e-waste fund, if I'm exact. Now that fund is now becoming a source of trying to encourage recycling. So we currently have about a few recycling companies. I don't have them all offhand, but I know there's one in Kumasi that I visited that tried to recycle batteries to give back to the community to use to store for their mini grids. Now it goes beyond just recycling of waste. That is the e-waste recycling, but it goes beyond that. So I think that document will tell you. In that document, it specifies clearly what is the duration for the waste disposal, recycling, and all of the others. So please get the E-Waste Act, and it should be able to list quite a number. And the regulation that follows, the regulation I think is 1217. I don't have the number offhand. I try to remember most of these numbers, but yes, just ask for the regulation for the e-waste. And then that regulation sets clearly all of the fines and all of that, what could be used with the waste, and further on from that, really. And if you have any other questions, we can speak further, or I can direct you to the EPA.
Awesome.
Okay, I think that's it.
Okay, thank you very much, Doris. Do you have any parting words for us before we close?
I'll just say I'm happy we could all deliberate here, and really I look forward to us becoming ambassadors ourselves before we are ambassadors to the general public. And I'm looking forward to this program being impactful way beyond the timeline of which it's running and into the future. Thank you. And thank you for listening.
Excellent. Thank you so much for your inputs. I think for me, it's some of the things that I want to do, and moving away from this session is, one, I are obviously learning more about the different policies and what's happening in the space, because you can't engage with policy if you don't have ideas and if you don't understand what is going on. Two is, we want to create new policies, but oftentimes in Ghana, we are in a situation where a lot of the policies are there, but they are not actually being implemented. So that's where we can draw on advocacy to ensure that, some of the brilliant policies that we have in place are actually implemented. So that's kind of like a huge opportunity for the kind of work that we can do as air quality ambassadors in general. So yeah, thanks so much for that. I think Ato was trying to come in.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I'm just thinking of how we can package this information and make it easily, accessible, and we can disseminate it easily to others, who are in our network, and, different audiences that we have. So, Gamali, I think we should do some work around that. Even if it's just a simple Google Doc, this is where they find all the information. I think that would be great. Yeah.
Fantastic.
And, Yeah, I also wanted to mention Wonder. So Wonder is with New Narratives. They are doing a lot of work covering, Clean Air Ghana related stuff through podcasts and journalistic pieces. So Wonder is great for you to join this. So I think, we can definitely be in touch around some of the way the New Narrative is doing. And we're in the month of May. So we have several Connect meetups around Clean Air Ghana. I think we have 6 more to go. We have whole Takra Day tomorrow. We have Accra Sunyane on Saturday. I think Tamale also on Saturday. And then we have Bolga and Kumasi on the 31st to end the month. And then Barcamp, happened last Saturday. Barcamp is this Saturday. So let's continue engaging and advocating and ensuring that we can help people take a lot of action to ensure clean air for all. So once again, everything is on the hashtag. And yes, we have 2 X Spaces tomorrow. We have 2 X Spaces tomorrow. We have Christabel, who is based in Tema, about recycling and innovation. We have Sorebia, who is a popular rapper in the Upper East region, also focusing on the role of the society in clean air. So again, all of these are through the hashtag Let's Engage. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Ato. And thanks to everybody who joined the session. Wanda, it's a pleasure to meet you, and thanks for your engagement, for your questions, and for the wonderful discussion. Thanks once again, Doris, for your insights and for sharing with us, and look forward to our future collaborations and our future activities. Have a great evening. Bye-bye.